Good evening, everyone. You know, our friend Joost Sheeran has to lecture tonight in Hamburg. And so I have the privilege now to introduce to you the speaker of tonight. And you see her already, that's Caroline Bratt from the Waldorf University College. And she will talk, she has a wonderful title, she will talk about the individual and the community, hot topic in the Waldorf movement. The individual and the community, and the subtitle is a very, very nice title. Subtitle, Heroes and the Rest of Us. I liked it very much. She is in this moment, since 2010, the head of the Waldorf University College in Stockholm, and she was from 2006 till 2010 there a teacher. And before that, she was a class teacher at Kristofferskolan in Stockholm. She studied law and Waldorf education. And the year of her birth is a secret. So we will not open that. And we are very happy that she will talk to us tonight. And we will listen very careful. And when that is done, we will have time for a conversation and questions, and she will give very interesting answers that I know already now. So I think, Katarina, is there something what I have missed?
No, I think that was all.
Okay, then I think I give now over to Caroline Bratt, and we are very happy that you will talk to us tonight. Go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak in this series of lectures. My lecture part will be slightly shorter than usual because Joost Sheeran asked me to, before the lecture, present the network of INASTE. So I will do that. But I'll start by saying a few words about my background, and from that go to giving a short introduction to INASTE before I come to my main topic, the one of the individual and the community and the heroes and the rest of us. So as Christoph said, I'm the head of Waldorflärarhögskolan in Sweden. And it's the only institute in Sweden that offers class Waldorf teacher and kindergarten teacher education today. And I consciously say education, even though I know it's more common to say teacher training. I say that too sometimes by mistake, mostly. I think training is more for animals and education is more for teachers, even though that includes practice and training. Anyhow, I have a background as a class teacher and I worked as such for 14 years. And before that, I studied law. So I made a rather big change of direction in my life by going from law to Waldorf education. And since 2006, I've been working full-time with teacher education, Waldorf teacher education. And this has included also trying to develop the education programs so that they maintain the seminaristic and artistic qualities and at the same time can hold an academic and research-based standard. And I think that many of our Waldorf institutions struggle with being recognized and accepted by our national authorities. It's quite clear that we do in Sweden, at least. And we also wish to have a dialogue with others working within education, not only within Waldorf education, but also outside of the Waldorf context. And the academic field is a place for such a dialogue. And a third wish we have is to develop and strengthen the research in relation to Waldorf education. And I say this because these have been three of the reasons for my institution to join INASTE. And INASTE is an abbreviation for International Network of Academic Steiner Teacher Education. So now I'll go further to INASTE. So what is INASTE then? Well, it's an independent worldwide network of academic and academically oriented institutions that offer Waldorf teacher education programs. And I stress academic or academically oriented. Some member institutes are accredited institutes that deliver academic degrees, bachelor's, master's, etc. Some, like my institution, is not accredited, so we cannot deliver academic degrees. We have diplomas. But we all have in common that we strive to keep an academic and research-based standard in our programs. Either we can deliver degrees or not. And of course, there have existed and still exist many other networks and collaborations. One example is ITEP, the International Teacher Education Project. I'm sure that some of you have taken part of those meetings. There are also more regional ones. I don't know about them all. There is, for example, the Nordic Research Network for Steiner Teacher Education. So INASTE isn't the one and only organization, of course. But it developed out of a symposium held in Vienna in 2007. And they invited all European institutes for Waldorf teacher education because the idea was to assess the status quo and the plans for the further future development. And the reason for this was the Bologna process, because the Bologna process meant really a challenge and an opportunity for Waldorf teacher education to perhaps even redefine its position within the realm of higher education. And it wasn't only easy, of course, and international collaboration among Waldorf teacher education would help stimulate and inspire and perhaps foster this process. That was the idea. And in 2011, as members from European countries joined, the name became INASTE, European Network for Academic Steiner Teacher Education. But there were also other parts of the world that showed interest in joining. So, for example, university in Israel, New Zealand, Brazil, and also later on the United States, Taiwan also joined. So now INASTE became INASTE, International Teacher Education, Network for Teacher Education. And since the start, it was hosted in Austria by the Institute, Waldorf Teacher Institute there, and by Carlo Willmann in Vienna. And since October, it's hosted in Stockholm, and I have succeeded taken over the chair after Carlo. And those of you who listened to the lecture last week, that was Carlo Willmann lecturing then. So now we have 20 member institutes in INASTE, and only institutes are members, not individual persons. And then the member institutes appoint their representatives. And we meet twice a year, quite often in Vienna, and then we visit our different institutes, member institutes. And besides meeting twice a year, we also arrange bigger congresses. And we've so far had 4 congresses, and we're planning to have another one in 2025, and I'll say a bit about that later. And now, Katarina, you could perhaps put up the PowerPoint and show slide number 2, the one about INASTE. And the second slide. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. So in INASTE, we have formulated a document we call Aims and Intentions, and we have actually 7 bullet points, we could say, in that. But I've just put up 3 of them here. And the first one I already said, that INASTE is an independent worldwide network of academic and academically oriented institutions. And the second one is that the member institutes of INASTE aim to provide a scientific, research-based and artistic approach to the study, development and teaching of Waldorf pedagogy. And they do so in form of conferences, congresses, publications and cooperation. And as third bullet point, the theoretical foundation of Waldorf education, anthroposophy, is approached in a discursive, critical and productive manner taking account of relevant thinking and research. And the wish to work with an academic and research-based quality should not be seen as a will to simply adjust and give up in relation to a system or so. It's really sprung out of a will to look upon and get a deeper understanding of our own practice and our traditions and our theory, and to also have better possibilities of developing what needs to be developed. And Katarina, I think you can take away this slide now and just take away the PowerPoint. Thank you. It's also stressed in the aims of INASTE that teaching is really an artistic process. And I say that because sometimes I meet colleagues that are worried that we're trying to be so academic that we're going to lose the artistic and anthroposophical qualities that are important in Waldorf education. And we do provide a platform which allows for regular communication among the member institutions and sharing experiences, and the coordination of exchanges for students and faculty at member institutes. And I can say that the exchange of students, that's actually been quite difficult to realize, because it isn't so easy to help the students to change study places as we perhaps would wish. We also try to support member organizations with issues concerning research, academic quality, assurance and educational policy. And then we have the cooperation in organizing the international congresses. And the next Congress is going to take place in Vienna in May 2025, a 3-day-long Congress. And the main title of the Congress will be Human Intelligence, which I think is a really relevant and hot topic for not only Waldorf education, but for everyone, but also us. And hopefully around January, February, you will be able to read more about this, about the Congress on our website. And there will also be a call for papers, and perhaps some of you will be able to present papers. Who knows, that would be really nice. And of course, you're welcome to attend, and you don't have to present a paper to take part of the Congress, by the way. That's not a requirement. And regarding the website, we have a new website coming up shortly, and the current one doesn't really work very well at the moment, because the old website is being transferred to a new website, perhaps as we're speaking, actually. And I thought I'd ask Laura or Katarina to, perhaps when the new website is launched, you could send the new website address to those who are registered in ICW.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know if there are any questions just regarding INASTE. So, as I said, I live and work in Sweden, in the northern outskirts of Europe. And today it feels extra northern because we've had a snowstorm going on all day with cancelled trains and so on. And I hope that the internet won't be wobbly because of snow problems or anything like that. The Eurocentricity of Waldorf education has perhaps therefore not been as obvious in Sweden as in other parts of the world until rather late. I think the thing that we thought was strange in Sweden was that we didn't teach about Swedish history in the Waldorf schools for many years, because that wasn't part of the original Waldorf curriculum. That isn't the case anymore, of course. But the Eurocentricity that is found in the Waldorf curriculum and in Swedish schools and in Swedish society in general, we haven't been and still aren't really fully conscious about, of course. And my hope is that we're on our way, but I think that we have quite a way to go. And I say this because issues about Eurocentricity also matter in the topic of heroes. But this, I also say this because I'm speaking out of a context that I live and work within. And it also means that I sometimes might also use wrong English words in a not correct way. English is not my mother tongue. And I hope that you still will be able to understand what I'm saying. I think that Waldorf education is, perhaps some would say, or I would perhaps say, really has the potential of being world-oriented or world-centered. And world-centered education is not my expression. I've taken it from Gert Bista. And I will, at the end of my lecture, say something about that concept, because I think it's a very useful concept also in relation to the topic I'm having. When Bista speaks about world-centered education, it's in contrast with child-centered education, not Eurocentric education. But I'll come back to this and why I think it can be important for us as Waldorf educators, and why I think it has to do with heroes and the heroic as well. But first I'm going to speak about heroes and the rest of us, and why you might have to be a bit more aware of how we speak about them with our pupils, and how we perhaps ought to complete and change some of our traditional narratives about heroes. And I will also ask myself if role model is a concept that perhaps can help us, even though I'm quite aware that there is a difference between heroes and role models. And I'm also going to connect to part of what Ida Obermann talked about a couple of weeks ago, especially about heroic imagination that she spoke about. And lastly, then I'll try to connect this with the Bista's concept of world-centered education, as I said. When Jos Sheeran asked me to give a lecture in this series, I was at the time just reading a newly published book by my colleague Rui Tyson. He works part-time as an associate professor at the University of Stockholm and part-time in our Waldorf institution. And his latest book is a collection of essays, unfortunately only in Swedish. And one of the essays is about a topic that's bothered me for some time without me really putting into words. And it's the topic of heroes, or the hero. And perhaps bothered is not the right word, but it's a topic that I've thought about in the sense that we perhaps would need to rethink it in different ways. And I haven't really formulated to myself until I got the question from Jost. And much of what I say today is based on Rui's writings. Why we as Waldorf educators might do good in reflecting on the idea of the hero is, of course, because we have a tradition of telling stories and biographies about heroes as part of the Waldorf curriculum and part of our teaching. And my aim is not that we shouldn't do this, but rather reflect upon why, when, and how we do it, and perhaps add some things and perhaps change some things. I personally have a sort of double and slightly contradictory relationship to heroes. On the one hand, there's something inspiring hearing about them, reading about them, and perhaps even meeting heroes. And on the other hand, there's also something quite seducing and distancing with heroes, the hero that saves the others. And I would also say that when somebody is named a hero, there's a risk that we, the others, become a bit blind and uncritical. And I also think that there's a risk that in supporting heroism, one also risks supporting kind of egoism and wish for power. So there's something both wonderful and at the same time but dangerously toxic or poisonous about our longing for heroes and geniuses. And I think we have to be careful with that. And questions that one could ask oneself are, do we use heroes to inspire our pupils and to show potential or a possibility that they have within them? And yes, I think that is what we try to do as Waldorf teachers when we tell our stories. And do we use heroes to show on what is right and what is wrong? Yes, perhaps. And this might be difficult. And do we want the pupils to be able to identify with the heroes we present? And which heroes will I then choose to present? And is it an important goal for our pupils and us to become heroes? And for us that our pupils want to become heroes, is that important? And one can also ponder upon what a hero is. who decides when somebody's a hero? And who decides when somebody who is considered a hero all of a sudden should not be considered a hero? We have many such examples in history, I think. What defines a hero? And do we think differently about all this depending on which generation we belong to, in which culture we've been brought up, etc.? Some heroes are more godlike and some are more human, and some heroes certainly have almost godlike powers. And we also have an, I think, uncountable number of superheroes nowadays. When I was a child, there was Batman, Superman, and now there are many new heroes. And they take the form of puppies and dinosaurs, and they have many different sort of capacities. And I think the children of today meet heroes of a kind that differ quite a lot from the teacher's idea of what a hero is. But can we, by thinking about the idea of heroes, find a slightly different approach in how to empower our pupils to become grown-ups that are attentive to the needs of the other humans and the world without having the vision of becoming heroes on pedestals? And when I speak of heroes now further on in the lecture, I don't speak of the heroes in cartoons or modern films, even though I think that the presence of those can sometimes make it more difficult for us to speak about heroes with the children and pupils. Rui Tyson, he describes a hero as someone with an epic life. And in the epic lies, in some sense, that we are taken beyond ourselves. It's a life story that isn't only our own, but part of a larger drama, or perhaps a larger drama that takes place through us. And to just mention a couple of examples, but I'll be very restrictive with and careful with giving examples, because I don't want to get stuck in a discussion of which ones are more good or more evil or so on. But to mention a few names now in the beginning, Martin Luther King could be an example. Perhaps Napoleon could be mentioned, or Joan of Arc. But those names aren't the most important ones now, because what I want to come to is rather that what could be the contrast to this epic story, these epic stories or narratives, to these epic dramas. And Tyson, he puts the prosaic in contrast to the epic. And the prosaic narrative is something that doesn't shine and shimmer as does the epic. The prosaic narrative is much more the one of everyday life. And I choose to say everyday life and not mundane, because I think that mundane has too much of boring connected to it. And I do think that one thing that attracts us with the hero is the lack of boring. An individual living the life of an epic drama does not have a boring life, as perhaps people living in the prosaic realm are thought to have. And I would also claim that looking back at the epic narratives, they have more masculine and male qualities connected to them, and the prosaic stories have more of feminine qualities. And one can, of course, see other polarities like active, passive, the big world, the small world. And as I said, the drama quality or the dramatic quality is also something that characterizes the epic narrative. There is a visible biography, a visible meaning, a described meaning. It's adventurous rather than boring. And the prosaic narrative does not have that in the same way. And for a person to stand out historically, it's been more or less necessary to be epic. And the possibility to do so hasn't been accessible to all people in a fair way, or an equal way. I mean, class, fortune, gender, all those things and much more have mattered. Other qualities that are seen in the epic stories are those of love, revenge, courage, honor, friendship, glory, victory, also sometimes tragedy, etc. And in the prosaic, one will find more of work, continuity, silence, and perhaps obedience. And the epic hero becomes the savior of those living prosaic lives. People with no clear biographies that can be liberated by the hero. And in this sense, there's a distance between the hero and the saved. The hero has a visible individuality, whilst the others tend to be a group of people with not so clear faces, quite anonymous, rather than individual persons. The image and idea of the hero has historically been quite important. And when Europeans set out to colonize different parts of the world, many of those doing so, they didn't only do it for money and power, but also to save people. And the saving part could legitimize really terrible actions and give that heroic shimmer to those actions. And now, Katarina, perhaps you could put up the third slide. There's a famous poem by Rudyard Kipling that illustrates this, how you use sort of the saving part to legitimize your actions. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sins to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new court sullen peoples, half devil and half child. And this is a very dark side of heroism. And another example from literature on the same topic as Kipling's poem is I'm taking from a novel by Tiongo, a Kenyan author, and it's the novel A Grain of Wheat. And in this novel, there's a character, one of the British administrators in Kenya, who is very optimistic about building a British colony and getting the inhabitants to embrace British culture. And he thinks of himself as doing something not only good, but also great, perhaps even heroic. And he has a kind of paternalistic and epic vision of this. And when he realizes that isn't what the people want, he says, eliminate the vermin. And the dark side shows itself. And the somehow rather unindividualized group of people that he wanted to save become easy to think of as vermin because they had already not been recognized as individuals, just an anonymous collective in need of savior. And we could say that this is just history because this example is, but I think that the dark side or the risk of it is always there, and we don't always know until later which was the dark side. And this becomes tragic in the sense that the epic heroism becomes inhuman, but so does the prosaic life, because the people inhabiting the prosaic narrative are derived from living their individual lives, derived from a kind of potentiality of living fuller lives. Many of the epic drama narratives tell us about struggles and conquers and battles, and many of these stories also include descriptions of almost festive atmosphere preceding a battle, for example, and this could almost cover the difficult lives in the prosaic sphere leading to the need of battle. The epic hero very strongly points out one individual standing out from the diffuse community. And what Tyson really tries to show is the risk of the epic heroism eliminating the possibility of living full lives, letting individuals bloom in the realm of the prosaic. And he says that perhaps it's time to, instead of letting the epic be something so connected to one individual in contrast to the others, letting the epic become much more of a common concern, and that we perhaps can let the individuality become stronger within the realm of the prosaic, in how we relate to our fellow humans, how we relate to the earth, and by doing so, giving the prosaic more of a luster. And I'm going to try to say more about that. As you see, it's not the epic in itself that I wish to take away. It's rather trying to take some of the qualities and see how they can enrichen the realm of the prosaic, of the everyday life. And the everyday life is much about community, our common community and our common responsibility for our community and the world and the earth. In this lies that in every individual's life story, many other people stand around supporting what can become. And we can all contribute in such a way that every individual can live a full and glorious life without it being at somebody else's cost. How can we support each other in getting the possibility to live individual and epic lives? And I can ask myself, which people have helped me in this sense? And have I helped others in this sense? So the prosaic must become more epic and individualized, and the epic has to become much more of a common responsibility, not the responsibility of one individual. And this might also mean that the epic would give up the quality of power and misuse of power and violence that has been far too strong. And what could be done in a Waldorf school setting or in any school setting to support this and make it more concrete? How can we help and support our pupils in this? And I'm not saying that we should not tell the stories and narratives about the different heroes, even though we certainly must always consciously think and rethink about the choices. They can easily be one-sided, and if one wants to put it very simple, many white men. And we must also look upon that from a more post-colonial perspective, and that's sort of a topic of its own. And if one is interested in this, Ruby Tyson has just published an article in Rose, the web-based journal about Steiner education, on the topic of post-colonialism. And I know that Michael Seck, who is lecturing in December, has dealt with these issues a lot. And I can also recommend those of you who didn't listen to Kenya Strong's lecture, the first lecture in the series, to listen to her lecture, because she also touches upon all these issues. I think that perhaps we should think of speaking about and looking for role models. Sometimes it might be more important to put forward role models rather than a hero. I think that Alan Swindell mentioned the role model during Ida Obermann's lecture, actually. If we think about our own lives, we will probably see that we had people around us that we think of as role models, and some of them are doing heroic deeds in the small world. And as I mentioned, I know that heroes and role models aren't the same thing, but I think that perhaps we should upgrade the role model. But how can we create situations in which the epic prosaic can occur? Can we, together with our pupils, design projects that are such that we give something to the community, the one in which we live, and as pupils grow older, the community can grow beyond the local. Projects that at the same time help the pupils not only to take space, but to create space for each other to flourish. And can some of those projects be done in cooperation with other community members? And I know that there are schools and classes that do things in this area, like visiting old people's homes, collecting money for charity. And some schools might still have the social practicum. In Sweden, that disappeared many years ago because it was difficult to combine with the national curriculum. There's a Swedish expression, to knock on an already open door. I don't know if that expression exists in English. Perhaps, but I think you might be able to understand what I mean. Perhaps what I'm speaking of is already done by many, that the quality I'm trying to show upon is called for more in Sweden than in other places. But still, I think that more could be done if thought through more systematically, consciously, and long-term. And this can be a way of empowering young people and helping them to practice as members of a community. And it might be a way to in a practical way, sort of practice democracy, how to use democratic processes in civil society to strengthen democracy. And today it might be even more important to strengthen the civil society and the individuals carrying civil society. Civil society has been seen as a reflection of democracy. But now we in Europe have a situation in which many right-wing parties claim that civil society is a threat to society. And they're using this as a way of sort of strangling democracy. I also think that it was thinking about a teacher from a school in the UK, and I don't remember her name, but she described that she found it difficult that the Waldorf pupils in many ways are so privileged, and that she was concerned that the individuals easily developed to becoming egoistic individuals. And I also wonder if a way to work more with the kind of, with what I'm trying to show upon, could be a kind of counteraction to egoism. In relation to Ida Obermann's talk, Jost referred to Steiner's fourth lecture in the study of man. And he mentioned the importance of giving young people the opportunity to do good, that to do good can be a strong wish, and that there's a risk that one out of frustration loses the wish. And Steiner says that when one could have done better, it's important to repent, not only to repent, but to do again and to do better. It's a way of nurturing the wish and the will, the intention of the young person. And to only think and talk about the good to be done, that can turn into a kind of egoism. I also think that we perhaps could start doing such things earlier than we traditionally have done. Narratives can inspire, but just as we practice many other things in school, I think that we can practice more than we do in the social sphere and in the sphere of ethics. To practice good deeds in everyday life, to see that a heroic deed must not be individual in the sense soloist, and a heroic deed must not have the dimension it has in the hero narratives we tell. A good deed can have its strength in individuals doing something together. And I would like to connect and comment on a couple of things that Ida Obermann took up in her lecture. I don't know if Ida's here yet. I know that she's traveling from the airport.
I'm right here
evening.
right now with big ears.
Oh, good. Thank you, Ida, that you made it. Because you can perhaps then afterwards say something about what I say about your lecture here. Because Ida spoke about Philip Zimbardo and how he developed the idea and the concept of heroic imagination. And Philip Zimbardo, he's especially known for the Stanford prison experiment, and that there's much to be said and read about that experiment, and we won't do that here. But Zimbardo, he was much interested in how good people became evil and how to avoid the evil and do good. And in the later part of his life, he has especially worked with how to do good. And it's in that work that he started speaking about heroic imagination. And Ida showed us a book with the title The Hero Handbook, written by Zimbardo's colleague, Matt Langdon, who's continued Zimbardo's work in this field. And Katharina, you can put a link to that book in the chat if you want to, if somebody's interested in looking it up. But I became curious because I hadn't heard about this book before, and I had to order it and read it. So Langdon's book builds on the ideas of Zimbardo's. And heroic imagination is described as thinking and imagining a situation in which you are acting heroic in effort to encourage yourself to act heroically later. So you think and imagine about the situation. You sort of practice by a kind of mental role play. And Langdon also describes what he calls heroic habit. And in heroic habit, that's a small repeated action that can make helping others become almost automatic. So you really don't think about it, you just, out of yourself, you do it automatically. I like the idea of small actions. I don't think that we should underestimate small steps. Many small persistent steps can take us further than big singular happenings or leaps. The Catholic activist Dorothy Day, that is a bit, you can laugh at it when you hear the name, but Dorothy Day is her name. She said that if small is not always beautiful, at least it's always human. And she strongly believed that small deeds, permeated by love and care, could shake the world and change the landscape. And I think I share her belief there. And this is something else than striving or wishing to be the great hero doing the great heroic deed. But the goal of heroic imagination is not, as I understand it, the one of the small habitual actions. but something bigger, something that we would more normally think about when hearing heroic deed. And I do ask myself if the idea of imagining myself as the hero, is the most desirable in our time. I would wish for a vision of individuals that are more team players than soloists, that act not only for the community, but with their fellow humans. When somebody starts to speak about imagination, and especially heroic imagination, and you're a Waldorf teacher, it's difficult not to get in mind Steiner's concept of moral imagination. A practice that tries to combine the epic and the prosaic isn't static. A practice is dynamic, and we can't think that we're ever finished, so to say. And developing practice requires some kind of imagination, how to realize an idea, an ideal. To build a bridge between the idea and practice requires imagination. And looking around in the world, one understands that this is difficult. Many good ideals are obviously difficult to realize in practice. And in addition, what is a good practice in one time can be bad practice in another time. And imagination in itself is really neither good nor evil, but can be used for both. Moral imagination, I think I would say, is about asking oneself how one can enrich others and the world. And moral imagination can be a bridge between our ideals and our actions. And while I understand Zimbardo's idea of heroic imagination to be more about individuals becoming heroes, as heroes in epic narratives in Tyson's meaning, I understand Steiner's concept of moral imagination to be about how individuals enrich each other, not only in the epic heroic meaning, but again to refer to Tyson in the prosaic sense. And I think that Rui Tyson might say that moral imagination can help develop the epic quality in the prosaic. My second comment in relation to Ida's lecture is the question asked by Ida, and if I remember correctly, also by Christoph. How come the community school for creative education in Oakland that Ida founded together with others achieves so good results despite the difficult conditions? Is it the art? Is it the handicraft? Or what in the education supports the positive development? And as I understood it, many of the teachers are not so knowledgeable in Waldorf education or anthroposophy. And as Ida pointed out, this should be researched. That's not yet been done. But I'm still going to allow myself to speculate a bit. Because I've been asking myself if one contributing factor lies in the word community. I know that Ida's played a really vital role in the school, and I absolutely do not want to diminish or reduce your role in the school, Ida, or your work in the school in any way. But I also know from Ida that an important part of the school has been about including the community surrounding the school, the parents, others, and empowering all these others to step in, listening to each other, enabling them to grow. And Ida has, so to say, really done something that has helped others to step forward and doing something together. And I wonder how much this togetherness has mattered and still matters for what is happening in the Oakland school. Ida spoke about harvesting stories about heroes. I'd like to speak also about harvesting stories about when individuals have achieved things together. We're not heroes, but the rest of us have helped each other to do something good together, and also making role models more visible. And perhaps the story of the Oakland School is such a story. I'm going to leave this theme a bit abrupt here because I want to say something about Bista's idea of world-centered education. And my hope would be that those of you who haven't yet read Bista's work, will try to find time to do so. And Katarina, you could put the link to get Bista's website in the chat, perhaps. Biste is one of today's more well-known professors in education. He's originally from the Netherlands, but he works mainly at the University of Edinburgh as professor in educational theory and pedagogy. I think that his book, Good Education in an Age of Measurement, which was published in 2010, if I remember correctly, perhaps was the first book in which he really reached out. It became a bestseller in Sweden, at least. But since then, he's published several books. He does have an indirect connection to Waldorf education. His children have all attended Waldorf schools, but he hasn't written very much directly about Waldorf education. But in my opinion, his writings on education are relevant for all of us working with Waldorf education today. Last week, Carol Willman mentioned the consumer society. Biste speaks about the impulse society, how the lifestyle of today is much characterized by impulse, the impulse to do and get what I desire. And this is strong. I can't believe that I can't be the only one here who, for example, who struggles to resist buying and consuming things I can't really claim to need. And still I on some level know that my lifestyle and the lifestyle in Sweden is not sustainable. It's not the knowledge that lacks, it's something else. And to live in a grown-up way, as Biste puts it, is partly to return to the question whether one encounters within oneself as a desire is what one should be desiring. Should I really be desiring this what I desire? And this is a lifelong challenge, really, for us as humans and as teachers. And the surrounding society, the impulse or consuming society of today has not made this struggle easier. And this is the society that our young students are growing up in. We also see examples of young people opposing it. Some time ago, I read about a group of young people in Nevada who earlier this year took the right to a clean environment to court, and they actually won their case. Other groups of young people have not won their cases, but I'm always happy when I see these things happening. But I will start now really with what Biste ends with in his latest book, World-Centered Education, A View for the Present. And I strongly recommend that you read this book to see how he builds up to this ending. And Katarina, perhaps you could take slide 4 in the PowerPoint now.
I'll try my best.
Thank you.
Now you see slide 1.
You see slide, yeah, this is
Now
the one,
it's
thank
4?
you.
Yep.
Yeah, this is 4. And we don't see it in the speaker's view, I think.
Okay, I see it in the speaker's view, but that's okay. I'm sorry, I can't change it because I see it in the speaker view, but
yeah, okay, but
okay, while you speak. Okay.
And now you have to go back because now it's jumped a slide ahead.
Okay, wait. So,
no, it's still that one. Thank you. So I've picked some quotations from the last pages of Biste's book, his concluding remarks, actually. Now it's jumped again. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. And what Biste really wishes to emphasize here in his concluding remarks is that world-centered education, to understand it, you should understand that it's the world that provides the demand and not the teacher. And he writes, in world-centered education, it's the world that provides the demand, not the teacher. And this is not to discharge the teacher from his or her responsibility, but to see that the key task of the teacher is to point the student to the world, to redirect the student's attention to the world, so that it becomes possible without guarantees, of course, that the student may meet that which the world is asking from him or her. And note that he says that the key task of the teacher is to point the student to the world. And if you go to the next slide, Katarina, he says a bit more about this, the pointing. At least in Sweden, if you look perhaps 10 years back, it hasn't been very, it's been considered very old-fashioned for a teacher to point to things. This is a way of going back to a kind of original view on the teacher, I think, the pointing thing. The significance of pointing, of the act of pointing and the form of pointing, is that it doesn't force the student into anything, but appeals to his or her freedom and in a sense reminds the student of his or her own freedom. Precisely because of this, precisely because the freedom of the student is at stake, and more specifically because the freedom of the student is called upon, the work of teaching is without guarantees. This is both reassuring and troubling, I think, to know that as a teacher, there are never guarantees. And sometimes, of course, that is troubling, but it's also reassuring that this is how it is. And the next slide, please. And what the teacher does then, according to Bista, is to address the I of the student, and perhaps the student will respond the call and then respond in freedom and with responsibility, perhaps. The teacher calls the student to attend to the world. You, look there. And educational causality, therefore, is evocative causality, so to speak. And with that, evocative causality means you try to sort of raise a feeling in the student so that the student will act and do something, but you can't really, it has to happen, something has to happen in the student, and that isn't just causal in the sense A causing B. It works as an address and seeks to address the I of the student. Hey, you there, where are you? And whether the student responds with an I am here or with an it doesn't have anything to do with me, I was just following orders, is as mentioned up to the student. But by knocking on the door of our students and by raising the question whether anyone is there, we at least try to give them a fair chance at their subjectness, whatever the way in which they will respond to what the world may be asking of them. And this the world may be asking of them. I think this is one of the qualities we have to try to find when we also look about how we help our students to wish to do good deeds together. Freedom is not so much the possession of the I as that it seeks for the I and calls for the I. It calls for the I of the individual into existence in and with the world. I think that our pointing, our effort to give, isn't, of course, enough. It also asks of the student to respond and be willing to be given to. And in addressing the I of the student lies a call for this I to also see the others, to acknowledge the I of the fellow students, of the fellow humans, and perhaps try to help them all to let the epic bloom in the prosaic. And as I said earlier, that the prosaic must become more epic and individualized, I think this has a very different quality to it than that all shall be heroes. This demands of us not to create distance to what surrounds us. To bridge distance requires attentiveness to others, to a situation. It requires an I an I that also is willing to recognize the I of others and each I of the others. And today we would also have to speak, I think, more about recognizing the earth itself, the world and the earth itself. Waldorf education, Waldorf pedagogy wants to support freedom and incarnation. And with freedom comes the ability and need to take responsibility. And to incarnate also means to incarnate into this world, on this earth, and in some way want to live with fellow humans and the earth, becoming grown-ups. And these are difficult tasks. And I think not the least the climate crisis, which also is connected in one way to kind of human rights crisis, because they go hand in hand. These crises that we are facing show us that we must become better at both acting responsibly and listening to the need of the earth we live on. And it will require that we reflect even more on what freedom in relation to everyone and everything surrounding us means. And I think that we need communities of many individuals acting together, not the hero, but the rest of us, or rather all of us together. Thank you. And I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Carolina. It was a wonderful, highly interesting contribution. Thank you so much. We have now a lot of time to have conversations. We can look in the chat. What is there? There's a lot of, but let's start with just with the yellow hand. If there are questions directly to Carolina, that would be to Caroline, that would be wonderful. Are there some questions? You know how to raise your yellow hand, and then we will look for it.
And I hope,
yeah.
And I hope Ida also can say something in relation to what since I said quite a lot about your school, Ida.
Yeah, I saw Ida, so probably she wants to say something. Ida, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, there you are.
Yes.
Caroline asked if you wants to say something.
I would like to say something. First of all, just a tremendous appreciation, deep appreciation for what you presented here. Secondly, just very quickly, because I don't want to distract, I'm in fact going to just put it in the chat in a minute. Zimbardo very much agrees with you, and I'm right now adding his qualities of the new hero, and one of them beautifully is to diffuse away from solo heroes to ensembles, and that it's about doing for others rather than oneself. So, and I put the reference in the chat. So enough about that. We can take questions if anybody's interested. I was so moved by what you said about community, because even now, as I've been thinking more about the school, having retired and done the Camino, how the community school, how much I think it's the community. And I would love to think more deeply how your point about the epic and the prosaic already lives in the first school in Stuttgart, in what Steiner there was nurturing. If we think then that teachers got in the prosaic, I'm going to see if this works, but doing something as teaching, there was the epic power given that teachers had equal voice, that decisions were made together. So that prosaic epic blend that we are grappling with, that is connected to community and is away from the and the white horse, I feel is already foreshadowed, and I think Steiner's asking for us to go further there. So I just really want to thank you, and much more to say, but just thank you for these key pieces. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say is this beautiful point that you made with Bista. In our school for a while, we were working with the Zulu practice, actually brought through a parent. It's a Zabona practice where we were in lower school. The greeting to the child would say, when the child came in, not shake the hand, good morning, but the child said, I am here. And the teacher answered, I see you. And that was the exchange from a very ancient tradition, and it resonates with the beautiful points you made, and I think is deeply relevant to what we're trying to build in Waldorf education.
Thank you so much. Yes, Caroline.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ida.
Yeah, that's very good. Other questions or comments? Yeah. Yeah. That with the heroic, huh? I always understood that these are archetypes in the end to battle yourself. That's the only real heroism that is also at the same moment prosaic. If you overcome yourself, that's also an element in this conversation, I guess. Or Caroline, what do you think?
Could I say something to that? Yeah, I guess that, of course, there are archaic heroes, but still there is something with also them that sort of distance them from the group of people they're saving. And there's something about this, the saved ones, that they become a bit anonymous in a way that perhaps isn't really what we wish for. And many of the archaic heroes sort of, they have these qualities of, even if they're not only men, but still it's a kind of quality of the strong man, I think.
Yeah. If you look, for example, at the biography of St. Francis,
yeah,
he became a saint because he conquered himself.
Yeah.
And that you see also with female saints, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't tell about St. Francis, for example. I would, if I had class.
I come to it because it's an outspoken example of someone who conquered himself.
Yeah.
Before he came to what he was. And the same you see in modern biographies also. I think as you think about the big freedom hero from South Africa, he was also in the beginning a wild rebel and shooting around. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
I'm asking myself, what is the archetypal image of the hero? I guess all these images are nice and wonderful, but in the end, it is about do I overcome myself?
Do I overcome myself, and am I willing to sacrifice something for doing good in some sense? Yes.
Yeah, I guess that's also an aspect of this whole
it is
story. If you go to the legend of Parsifal, you have it quite extreme. Parsifal did in the beginning also not so very clever things, as I understood. Yeah, it's interesting about this.
I see 2 yellow hands now.
Yeah, there. Okay, it is Michael Zech and then Martin. Oh, first Martin.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Caroline, thank you very much. Very moving and thought-provoking talk. You mentioned Ngugi wa Thiong'o and this wonderful book that he'd written. And it reminded me that one of the things that he championed was, in a sense, challenging the heroic status of English as the dominant colonial language and replacing it with the prosaic language that only he and his people speak. And he wrote many of his stories and plays in Kikuyu and then translated them into English. And I think this is very much part of this in his theory of literature, where he talks a lot about oracy, the literature of the spoken language, as it were, that this has always had a kind of inferior status in relation to literature as such. It's a kind of similar kind of analogy. And his idea of what he calls in his literary theory globalectics, in other words, all the points on the surface of the sphere are equidistant from the center. There is no kind of hierarchical center. It is rhizomic. That in that sense, it has a kind of democratic quality that the small and the great have to find a relationship to each other. And I think this is very much in the spirit of what you were referring to Rui's idea of this heroic and profane. I think that's a very wonderful image for us. So thank you for bringing that.
And thank you for telling more about Thiong'o. You know much more about him than I do. I hear that just by what you're saying. Thank you.
Michael Zech.
Yeah, Caroline, thank you for the contribution. I want to add one aspect. I believe, and this is also a task, I believe, in the high school training, I believe to be foreign in their own culture is a modern form of heroism. So to be strange in your own culture, I believe that's very, very important. And I believe we have to learn it because the old aim of education was to identify with your culture. But I believe now we are on a point we have to learn to go in distance, not to lose the identification, but to have the courage to look from outside to your own conditions.
I haven't thought about that. Thank you. I would actually like to hear you say more about it. I've become curious.
Yeah, Michel, do you want to say more about it?
No, because it's a part of my contribution in December.
Okay, so this is a kind of this is the trailer.
But I believe it's a key moment.
Yeah, you have to save that. You have to save that. I understand that. Then we go now to Benedict Meisnecker. Benedict, it's your turn.
Thank you. And thank you also to Michael Zech. It was a really nice teaser, and I'm also very keen to hear that. What I would like to share, it's going to be two thoughts. The one is connected with the question, which if I recall it in a correct way, which you, Caroline, said at the was kind of a question at the end of the article of Biester, and you mentioned it in the way should I be desiring the desire which I can find inside of myself?
And then that was a very clumsy way of saying something. The question is really, how can I deal with a desire that I perhaps shouldn't be having? Sort of, how can I struggle with the desires I have? And is my desire really what the world
Desirable.
How does my personal desire relate to the world's need from me?
And for me, there is a nice saying by a Christian monk who was also educated in India. I think his name was, oh no, I lost it, but maybe it comes later and I write it into the chat. He said, renunciation should not be seen as a sacrifice. What I mean by, because you also mentioned impulse society and renouncing on impulses. Renunciation should not be seen as sacrifice, but as freedom from the interests of one's ego. And this for me is often pretty helpful if I try to differentiate, is it really the thing that I really need, what I really desire, or is there just some voice within myself who desires it, but I can stay in distance and say, okay, yeah, maybe you desire it, but that's not yet saying that that's a necessity. And the second point, which I want to try to share, is regarding the term of world-centered education. And for me, it's something what sounds quite familiar, but in a different context. And I'm not sure if people have heard about the concept of theme-centered interaction by Ruth Cohn. I can write the shortcut is TCI. I post a link. And theme-centered interaction is based on 4 factors, where there is the I, which is meant to be the individuals in the group, the we, which is the community and the common norms and rules the individuals have with each other, and it's the it, which is not similar like what Sigmund Freud means by the it, but it's the aim why the people come together and form this group and spend this time together, which can be different in the setting of teacher with pupils, or if there are colleagues which are attending a meeting together. And the 4th factor, Ruth Cohn called the globe. And the globe are the different influences to the situation, which can be on a political level, which can be on the infrastructure or architectural layer, or it can be also meteorological, but it can also be the issues of the world, the issues of the globe. There can be several, one could say, onion layers of globe factors, which can make their influence want to be heard. So for me, this world-centered world-centered education fits pretty much into this, for me, a bit wider concept of the 4 factors of theme-centered interaction by Ruth Cohn.
Thank you. I can't really say much about that because I haven't heard about Ruth Cohn and what you describe as her factors of this.
Okay, yeah. Are there other remarks or questions to Caroline?
Yes. Oops.
There you are again.
Sorry. I wanted to go back, Caroline, to your question of what do we do as Waldorf educators in school to nurture what we are aiming to establish? And I was very interested in your suggestion that we do a lot of it, but we need to become more more strategic, more systematic, and more intentional, if I captured you correctly. I wondered if there is an example of that you can point to where you feel this is where this work that we're talking about of building that prosaic, epic, caring, heroism is already being done at one or another Waldorf school, where it's being done well, or where you see it's most promising, that might give us some food for further thought and research.
Yeah.
And
I think that what I have is actually almost the opposite, because, and now I'm really speaking out of a Swedish context. In Sweden, we're allowed to follow the Waldorf curriculum, more or less, but we have to follow the national curriculum. And in Sweden, we not only have the national curriculum, we also have a kind of time plan that says exactly how many hours we have to have in each specific subject. So we have to have a certain number of hours in maths, in English, in social science, and so on, from grade 1 and all the way up. And this has become more and more strict. And this has made it more and more difficult to make, to create objects, to create projects that aren't very specifically related to one subject. And there are very quite well-defined learning outcomes to each subject as well. And that might be one reason that I'm a bit concerned about this subject, that because I see the possibilities in Sweden have been decreasing. And when the possibilities are decreasing, then of course one would need to think even more systematically and with even more imagination on how you could, what can you do within these quite narrow frames that we have in Sweden. So I'm really not at all describing what you're asking for, because I don't see it very much in the schools in Sweden right now. I wish I could see it, and I would wish that it would be easier for teachers to do things that are sort of not in this very, I don't know, I can't find the English word now, small squares that we have to sort of stay within. It's even become more difficult. I mean, we still have the blocks and so on, but it's become more and more difficult even to do that, to work sort of subject integrated has become more difficult in Sweden as well, and to do things outside of school, difficult. So I would really like to hear about what can be done, what is done in other schools, perhaps.
Yeah, for all of us. One thing, if I can offer, and this has obviously also been a focus of ours, and we came in relationship with an effort that I've long felt more Waldorf schools, we as a Waldorf community could really take advantage of. It's called Global Scholars, and it's fully funded, and it's focused on middle school. And I will put the link in. What's interesting about it is it's trying to build global scholars, meaning both global caring as well as locally caring. And through this, our children were able to, also during COVID, but well before, be in partnership. We're teamed up with people, kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th, classmates in different countries, in different cities, in different schools. And they have conversations, they do things, but the whole project is there's every semester a theme like hunger, and you do something globally with your partners in 5 places in the world where they spend no end talking about what they like to eat together and fascinated, but then they do a project, but they also then do a local project. So then the children worked in the food bank, but it's a very promising, it seems very mission aligned with what we're trying to do in this time, because it's also standards aligned.
I have a strange thought. I guess you will not. For me, child-centered education and world-centered education is basically the same. Isn't it true? The human being is a part of the world, and the world is the human being. And if I look at in the curriculum, apart from the fact if it is Eurocentric, I guess every school sooner or later will individualize that. Then the curriculum is a guide to the world, or not?
Yeah.
I
can in some, yeah, I see what you mean, but I mean, I've been speaking of child-centered education as well. I've been speaking of Waldorf education as child-centered, and I perhaps still do, but there is something with how we as humans have not taken the earth and the world in account in a way that we should have, and that the expression world-centered education in one way forces me to think about that in a slightly sort of different way, even though they're related, so to say, because of course the child is a part of the world, but even so, humans in one sense have let the world down a bit.
Yeah. I have to think a little bit so to speak, the esoteric path that Steiner describes, that finds its end in the unification of man and world.
Yeah.
And that's something. And I guess essentially that's in the foundation of this whole cosmos of the new education, artistic education, to call it. Yeah. Are there other comments or remarks? It was wonderful to have you. There's someone.
Hi, I have a question. It's about this idea of encountering in ourselves desires which we should desire, and that it makes me wonder, who decides what we should desire, and how do we determine what is good for us?
Yeah, who decides that? I thought we've spoken a lot about that question amongst my colleagues here, and because this, of course, is a kind of tricky question. Who has the right to desire to decide what desire is a good one and what desire is a bad desire, so to say. And of course, we haven't been able to come up with a good answer to that question when we've spoken about it. And perhaps we would be able to better sort of reflect upon our own desires if we manage to be more attentive to the others around us. Perhaps the answer lies in our ability or lack of ability to actually listen enough to the needs of those around us or the world. But I don't really have a clear answer to that question. I think that's when I read Biester's text about the impulse society, this is one of the issues that is a sort of a problem that isn't really dealt with fully, I would say. And I can't really answer it. It's a good question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
It is basically a worldwide question, and at the same time, it's very individual. So amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very individual and at the same time worldwide. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that is a good thought to end with. Caroline, I guess. Thank you very much. It was.
Christoph, can I?
Oh, yeah.
Can I say? I'm sorry, I can't find the.
You're a little bit late, so be.
I just want to point to this because I think it holds the answer.
And what
Hey,
it
can
is?
you say it?
What
It's
is it?
The child as a sense organ. Okay. The anthropocentric understanding of, okay, Peter Zelk. Okay, that is a, we should read that, you say. Okay. That is a good hint. And with that, Caroline, thank you so much. It was very nice.
Thank you.
I would love to hear from you more. If your background as a lawyer gives other impact to your understanding of the educational questions, but that's probably for next time. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's something. Thank you. Thank you very
I've
much.
heard that in December we will listen to Michael Zech, but next week we hear Hornfi Sheng. I'm not sure if I pronounce it well. Hornfi Sheng from Taiwan, and he will talk about what does it mean to be a Waldorf educator from Taiwan in the 20s of the 21st century. That's what we will listen to next week. So again, Caroline, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for all the comments. And I guess, dear friends, thank you so much. We close now our broadcast and hopefully to next week, till next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you next
Bye.
week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.